Failure isn't the end of the road, it's the beginning of the highway. And the faster you fail, the quicker you discover what's real, what's true, and what actually works. Here's the harsh truth. Most people waste years of their lives trying to avoid failure. They tiptoe through life, hoping to make it safely to death, never having risked, never having tried, never having stepped out. And that's why they stay stuck, mediocre, and frustrated. But success doesn't come from avoiding failure. Success is born out of failure. The difference is how fast you're willing to fail, how quickly you're willing to get the feedback, and how ruthlessly you're willing to learn from it. Think about it. A kid learning to walk doesn't care how many times he falls. He doesn't sit there crying, saying, "Oh no, I failed 3 times. Maybe walking just isn't for me." No, he keeps falling and failing and tumbling until he gets it right. And eventually he walks. That's the essence of growth. Fail fast, fail often, learn, adapt, repeat. The reason most people never find real success is because they're too busy trying to engineer a perfect path. They plan for years. They wait for the right time. They overthink. They strategize. But by the time they finally take a step, someone else has already failed 10 times, learned 10 lessons, and is already 10 times closer to success. Here's the brutal reality: your first attempt will suck. Your second attempt will suck less. By your 10th attempt, you'll start to figure things out, and by your 100th attempt, you'll actually be good at it. The only way to skip the line is to embrace failure as quickly as possible. And here's the mindset shift: failure isn't something to fear. Failure is feedback. Failure is data. Failure is reality checking in and saying, "Hey, this way doesn't work, but now you know. Try another." Failure is feedback, not identity. This is one of the most liberating truths you can ever accept, yet most people live their entire lives resisting it. When you fail, it doesn't mean you are a failure. It doesn't mean you're worthless or incapable. It simply means you tried something and reality gave you information back. That's it. Failure is nothing more than a message, a signal that says, "This didn't work. Try again differently." But the problem is that we often confuse the event with the person. Instead of seeing failure as an external circumstance, we take it personally. We internalize it, wrap it around our self-worth, and convince ourselves that because something failed, we are failures. That false equation is what keeps people stuck, paralyzed, and afraid to take risks. Think about a child learning to ride a bike. The first time they wobble and fall, they don't declare themselves unworthy of riding bikes for the rest of their life. They don't say, "I'm just not cut out for this, I'll never learn." They fall, cry for a moment, dust themselves off, and try again. Why? Because they don't attach their identity to the fall. They instinctively understand that falling is part of learning. Somewhere along the line, though, as adults, we lose that perspective. We start taking every failure as proof that we're not good enough. We treat each rejection as a statement about our value. Instead of seeing feedback, we see a personal indictment. And that's where we go wrong. If you can begin to reframe failure as feedback, your entire approach to growth changes. Suddenly, you stop fearing failure and start using it. Failure becomes a teacher instead of a judge. When you apply for a job and don't get it, that doesn't mean you're unqualified for everything. It means you now know what that employer was looking for, and you can adapt for the next opportunity. When you launch a business idea and it crashes, it doesn't mean you're not entrepreneurial. It means you discovered a way that doesn't work, which brings you closer to a way that does. Every stumble, every mistake, every misstep contains information. And the faster you're able to collect that information, the quicker you can improve. The biggest tragedy is that people hide from failure because they think it defines them. They live small lives, never putting themselves out there, never chasing big dreams, never risking embarrassment, all because they've linked self-worth to outcomes. They're terrified that if they fail, it will prove once and for all that they don't measure up. But that's an illusion. Failure never says anything about who you are, it only says something about what you tried. The more you separate your identity from your results, the freer you become. Then you can step boldly into challenges, knowing that even if you fall, your worth as a human being stays intact. When you look at people who have achieved incredible things, you'll find they failed more than most. They didn't get there by avoiding mistakes, they got there by collecting more feedback than anyone else. They understood that failure was simply a compass pointing them closer to the right direction, and they never let a failed attempt define their identity. That's the mental shift. Once you stop tying failure to who you are and start seeing it as information, you stop fearing it. You start welcoming it. You lean into it because you realize every failure is bringing you closer to success. Speed matters more than perfection. This is a lesson that sounds counterintuitive because we're raised in a culture that glorifies flawless execution, polished outcomes, and getting everything just right before showing it to the world. But the truth is, perfection is an illusion, and chasing it is often the biggest roadblock to success. People waste years fine-tuning ideas, waiting for the perfect moment, or obsessing over tiny details, thinking that once everything aligns, then they'll act. But life doesn't reward the perfect plan that never leaves your head. It rewards the imperfect action that gets tested, refined, and improved over time. Speed gives you momentum, and momentum creates growth. When you move fast, you give yourself permission to try, to fail, to learn, and to adapt in real time. Perfectionists stall because they're scared of being judged for making mistakes. They believe one wrong move will ruin everything. But what actually ruins everything is the lack of movement. By the time a perfectionist finally steps into the arena, someone else has already failed 10 times, gathered 10 lessons, and is 10 steps closer to success. The world doesn't wait for you to be perfect. It rewards those who move, those who dare to take messy action while others are still hesitating. Think about how technology evolves. The phones in our hands, the apps we use every day, the tools we rely on, none of them were perfect when they first launched. They were buggy, incomplete, and full of flaws. But the companies behind them didn't wait until they were flawless. They received feedback, improved, and repeated the cycle. If they had waited for perfection, they'd still be testing in some lab, irrelevant to the world. It's the same with personal goals. Waiting until you're fully ready to start working out, to launch that side hustle, to write that book, or to learn that skill means you'll probably never start. Moving fast forces you into the process, and the process is where success is built. Speed is powerful because it compounds. Each attempt, even if sloppy, gives you insights that build on the last. The more attempts you take, the more feedback you receive, and the faster you grow. Perfection is static. It keeps you circling the same idea over and over in your head, polishing something that hasn't even been tested in the real world. But speed is dynamic. It gets you into the game. It teaches you through experience instead of speculation. And no amount of planning can match the lessons that come from actually doing. The irony is that people who chase perfection often end up failing more dramatically because they don't give themselves the space to learn gradually. They wait and wait and wait, and when they finally act, the stakes feel so high that a single misstep crushes them. But people who move quickly fail in smaller doses. Their failures come faster, lighter, easier to handle, and because they've built the habit of adapting, those failures don't paralyze them. They just become part of the rhythm. That's why moving quickly doesn't just accelerate progress, it also makes you more resilient. You don't need to have it all figured out before you start. You just need to start. Every successful creator, entrepreneur, athlete, or leader began by producing something imperfect, stumbling, and then improving. They didn't wait for their masterpiece to appear fully formed. They created rough drafts, prototypes, ugly first versions, and through speed and iteration, they shaped those into excellence. Excellence is born from speed, not from waiting for perfect conditions. The pursuit of perfection is just procrastination dressed up as diligence. The pursuit of speed is what creates momentum, and momentum is what brings results. Slow failure is more dangerous than fast failure because it creeps into your life without you noticing. It doesn't look dramatic, it doesn't knock you down suddenly, and it doesn't shock you awake. Instead, it quietly eats away at your time, your energy, and your potential until one day you realize you've wasted years in a place you never wanted to be. People often think avoiding failure is the safe option. They stay in jobs they dislike because at least it pays the bills. They remain in relationships that drain them because at least they're not alone. They hold on to routines that keep them comfortable but stagnant because at least they don't risk embarrassment. On the surface, this looks like safety. Underneath, it's slow death. This is what slow failure is, choosing the false security of comfort while your dreams, your growth, and your deeper potential wither away. The most dangerous thing about slow failure is that it disguises itself as stability. It makes you believe you're fine because nothing is collapsing, no catastrophe is happening, and everything feels predictable. But predictability doesn't equal progress. You can live years on autopilot, repeating the same days, the same choices, the same mistakes, until you wake up and realize the opportunity to build something extraordinary has slipped through your hands. Fast failure hurts, but it wakes you up. Slow failure numbs you, and that numbness is far worse because it convinces you to settle for less. Imagine two people, one tries a business idea and fails within a few months. The sting is sharp, but they learn quickly what didn't work, regroup, and try again. The other person dreams of starting, but keeps waiting for the right time. They wait 5 years, stuck in a job they don't like, telling themselves they're being smart and cautious. 10 years later, they're still waiting. One person failed fast and grew stronger. The other failed slowly by never trying, and that failure consumed a decade of their life without them even realizing it. Slow failure shows up in subtle ways. It's the voice that says, "Not yet, maybe later." It's the routine that feels safe but keeps you stuck. It's the dream you keep pushing aside because today feels easier than taking a risk. It's the toxic comfort of mediocrity. Fast failure is loud, obvious, and painful, but it gives you clarity. Slow failure is quiet, invisible, and painless in the short term, but it steals your time, the most valuable thing you have. You can recover from money lost, opportunities missed, even broken relationships, but you cannot recover wasted years. When you choose slow failure, you're essentially choosing to avoid growth. Life rewards people who test, risk, and adapt. If you wait too long to act, you deprive yourself of the experiences that would teach you who you really are and what you're capable of. The comfort zone may feel safe, but it's actually the most dangerous place you can live. Because in that zone, you don't just fail slowly, you fail invisibly. And by the time you realize it, the cost is enormous. Fast failure gets you moving, gets you feedback, and forces you to change. Slow failure locks you into cycles of fear and hesitation. And while one brings temporary discomfort, the other guarantees permanent regret. That's why the most dangerous failure isn't the kind you notice immediately. It's the kind that sneaks in quietly, day after day, as you trade your time for safety instead of growth. Confidence is built through failure, not through constant success. This goes against the story many of us grew up believing. That confidence comes from winning, from always being right, from always having things under control. But real confidence isn't about never falling. It's about knowing that when you do fall, you can get back up. It's about proving to yourself over and over again that failure won't break you. Each time you face a setback and survive it, each time you take a risk and realize you can handle the outcome, your confidence grows. That's why the people who seem the most secure in themselves are rarely the ones who've had smooth, easy lives. They're the ones who've fallen the most and learned that falling isn't fatal. When you fail, you face one of the most important psychological battles, the belief that you're not enough. Most people's confidence is fragile because they've never tested it. They've lived carefully, avoiding risks, steering away from rejection, and because of that, their confidence is built on untested assumptions. They tell themselves, I can handle life, but deep down they don't really know. They've never been knocked down to see if they could get up. And so their confidence shatters the moment something actually goes wrong. By contrast, people who fail often have been tested repeatedly. They know the sting of rejection, the frustration of mistakes, the disappointment of falling short. But because they've experienced all of that and kept going, their confidence is grounded in reality, not in fantasy. Think of an athlete training for years. They don't build confidence by winning every match effortlessly. They build it by losing, by being challenged, by pushing through defeats until they realize they can survive them. That's why seasoned athletes step into competition with a different energy than beginners. They've failed enough times to know that a loss won't end them. They've already experienced the worst case scenario and walked away stronger. That's real confidence. The same is true for entrepreneurs, artists, leaders, or anyone chasing big goals. Their confidence doesn't come from pretending they're invincible. It comes from failing, recovering, and proving to themselves that they can take a hit and keep moving forward. Failure strips away illusions. It forces you to confront your weaknesses and grow stronger. Every time you face that discomfort and don't run from it, you're training your mind to trust itself. You're teaching yourself resilience. Confidence isn't built by avoiding mistakes, it's built by embracing them. Each rejection toughens you. Each mistake clarifies your path. Each failure builds a layer of self-trust that says, I've been here before, I can handle this. And that self-trust is the foundation of confidence. The people you admire for their confidence aren't fearless. They've just failed enough times to know fear won't control them. They don't avoid rejection. They've been rejected so many times it barely phases them anymore. They don't crumble under setbacks because they've trained themselves to view setbacks as part of the process. Confidence becomes natural when you fail enough to see failure as normal instead of catastrophic. If you never allow yourself to fail, you never allow yourself to build that trust in your own resilience. You might look confident on the outside, but on the inside, you'll always be fragile, always afraid of the moment something doesn't go your way. But once you fail repeatedly and realize you're still standing, you stop being afraid of it. That's when confidence becomes unshakable, because it's built not on pretending you'll never fall, but on knowing you can always rise again. Success is iterative, not instant, and this is one of the hardest truths for people to accept in a world obsessed with overnight wins and instant gratification. We're surrounded by stories of people who made it big, seemingly out of nowhere. Someone launches a product and becomes a millionaire, a musician drops a song and suddenly takes over the charts. A startup founder raises millions in funding after their first pitch. What you don't see is the years of trial and error, the countless versions that failed, the relentless testing and adjusting that made that breakthrough possible. Success doesn't arrive in one clean, dramatic leap. It arrives in layers, built step by step, mistake by mistake, correction by correction. Every person you admire for their achievements has walked through dozens, if not hundreds, of failures before getting it right. The myth of instant success keeps people stuck because they expect too much too soon. They try something once, and when it doesn't immediately work, they assume they're not cut out for it. They forget that the first version is supposed to be bad. The first attempt is meant to be clumsy, awkward, incomplete. That's how the process works. You don't get to skip the iterations. You don't get to jump from idea to victory without crossing the messy middle where failure is common and mistakes are constant. The The more you embrace that truth, the more resilient you become because you stop expecting success to happen in one perfect shot and start understanding it as a long series of experiments. Think of how Thomas Edison approached the invention of the light bulb. He didn't try once and then give up when it didn't work. He went through thousands of tests, each one failing in some way. But each failure gave him more information about what didn't work, narrowing the path toward what would. He didn't see those iterations as wasted time, he saw them as necessary steps in the process. That mindset is what separates people who eventually succeed from those who give up. They see iteration as progress, even when the outcomes look like failure from the outside. The same pattern is visible in every creative field. Writers don't publish their first draft, they revise and rewrite until the story becomes clear. Musicians don't record one version of a song and call it perfect. They play with it, test it, refine it until it resonates. Athletes don't master a skill the first time they try. They practice, fail, and adjust until their performance becomes second nature. Success is never the result of one clean attempt. It's the byproduct of persistence, patience, and the willingness to repeat the cycle until you learn enough to get it right. The beauty of iteration is that each failure becomes less of a dead end and more of a stepping stone. Instead of seeing mistakes as evidence that you're not good enough, you start seeing them as clues pointing you closer to the answer. Every misstep refines your instincts. Every wrong turn teaches you something about the map, and slowly, through repetition and feedback, you carve a path forward. This is why success often feels inevitable once it happens, because by the time you finally arrive, you've gathered so much experience and insight through the iterations that the final outcome almost looks obvious. What people call luck or talent is often just the accumulation of small, messy steps no one else saw. The willingness to endure iteration is what creates breakthroughs. The people who appear to succeed overnight are usually the ones who failed behind the scenes for years until they finally hit the combination that worked. Success reveals itself to those who are patient enough to keep iterating long after others have quit. It's not instant and it's not clean, but that's exactly what makes it real and lasting. Failing fast creates resilience and progress because it forces you into a cycle of action, feedback, and adaptation. When you move quickly and allow yourself to fail, you don't just collect lessons at a faster rate, you also toughen your mindset. You become someone who's not easily shaken when things go wrong. Most people waste their energy trying to avoid failure altogether, but in doing so, they miss the chance to build the resilience that only comes from facing setbacks directly. Every quick failure strengthens your ability to bounce back. Over time, you stop seeing setbacks as devastating and start seeing them as temporary bumps in the road. This shift makes you mentally stronger, more flexible, and far more prepared to handle the unpredictable nature of life. Progress isn't a straight line, it's a messy zigzag path of trial and error. The faster you're willing to make mistakes, the quicker you can sort through what doesn't work and discover what does. This is why failing fast accelerates success. It compresses the learning curve. Instead of spending years slowly figuring things out, you rack up dozens of lessons in a fraction of the time. Each misstep gives you clarity, and clarity compounds into progress. The person who fails fast may experience more short-term pain, but they move forward in leaps compared to the person who carefully avoids failure and ends up stuck in the same place. Resilience is born out of repeated exposure to discomfort. If you never let yourself fail, you never develop the toughness required to handle bigger challenges. But if you fail fast and often, your tolerance for discomfort grows. What once felt unbearable becomes manageable. Rejection no longer terrifies you, mistakes no longer paralyze you, and setbacks no longer define you. Instead, they become part of your rhythm. This ability to absorb hits and keep going is what separates those who eventually succeed from those who stop at the first sign of struggle. Resilience doesn't mean you never feel pain or frustration, it means you've trained yourself to keep moving anyway. Failing fast also shifts your focus from outcomes to growth. You stop obsessing over whether you'll win or lose, and instead you start asking what you can learn right now. That mindset is powerful because it keeps you moving regardless of the result. Each action, even if it doesn't go your way, becomes valuable. You're no longer paralyzed by fear of failing because you've reframed failure as progress. And once you internalize that, you become unstoppable because nothing can take away your ability to learn. This cycle of failing fast, building resilience, and making progress creates momentum. The more you act, the more you fail, the more you learn, the more you improve. Over time, those small improvements add up to massive results. What looked impossible at the beginning becomes inevitable because you've developed both the skill and the toughness to keep going. People around you may see the success and think it happened suddenly, but what really happened was a long series of quick failures that shaped you into someone who could handle success when it finally arrived. The truth is, resilience and progress are inseparable. You cannot grow without setbacks, and you cannot build strength without testing yourself against failure. Failing fast gives you both. It shortens the distance between where you are and where you want to be, while simultaneously hardening you to handle the challenges on the way. It's not about chasing failure for the sake of it. It's about using it as fuel, a constant source of feedback that keeps you moving forward. When you embrace failing fast, you create a life where every stumble becomes a step forward and every obstacle becomes part of the momentum carrying you to success.